She thought her human husband was Meek, then she saw what he could do. It was the seat of power for the most influential alien family in the sector, a family known for its pride, strength, and ruthless cunning. Every visitor who entered the palace could feel the weight of centuries of authority. Among the high ceilings, the polished floors, and the ornate walls, a sense of awe mingled with fear. And yet in this hall of power and grandeur, a human walked quietly, almost unnoticed. He was small by alien standards. His shoulders were narrow, his hands soft compared to the clawed or scaled hands of the nobles around him. His skin was pale, almost fragile, and his movements were gentle, careful, and measured. He wore the simple attire of a human diplomat, clean, functional, but lacking the gaudy embellishments that signified status here. He did not shout. He did not assert himself. He did not demand attention. The alien nobles whispered when they saw him. "He is weak," one hissed behind a screen of crystal glass. "How can she, a Virilan noble, choose such a thing?" The female alien, Princess Relith Virilan, walked beside him with quiet grace, but her eyes betrayed her thoughts. She had chosen the human as her husband to strengthen her house through alliance with the distant human worlds. But she did not believe in his strength, not his body, certainly, and not his influence. To her, he was a quiet companion, polite and kind, yes, but far from someone who could survive in the cutthroat world of alien politics. "You should greet the council," she said softly as they entered the great hall. The human inclined his head politely. "Of course, my wife," he replied, his voice calm and measured. It carried no arrogance, no fire. The council waited as it always did, their eyes sharp, their minds even sharper. They were predators in their own right, ambitious, cunning, and dangerous. They were not used to human quietness. The whispers started again like a low hum beneath the marble floors. "Do you think he knows what he is doing?" a young counselor asked another, his scales shimmering with nervous tension. "Does it matter?" the other replied. "He cannot survive the politics here. He will fall before the first challenge." The human listened. He did not respond. He did not flinch. He simply observed. His eyes scanned the room, noting every gesture, every expression, every subtle shift of tension. To him, this was not fear, it was data. Relith noticed this, and for a brief moment she felt a flicker of doubt. Perhaps she had been too quick to judge him, but she quickly pushed it aside. The humans were simple, kind, gentle. That was their way. It was not strength. Not the kind needed to survive her world. The council meeting began. The humans' presence was new to the aliens, and they were careful to test him. They spoke of trade agreements, of border disputes, of resource claims. They spoke quickly, with layers of meaning hidden in every word. They expected confusion, hesitation, or deference. The human listened. He nodded politely. He asked questions. Then, when a particularly tricky problem arose, one that had stumped the council for weeks, he spoke. Not loudly, not arrogantly, but clearly, logically, and with precision. "Perhaps you are overlooking the energy matrix," he said, pointing to a display showing the planetary resource flows. "If you reroute these channels and balance the outputs, you can stabilize the distribution without overtaxing any sector." A murmur ran through the council. Some members exchanged skeptical glances. The human solution seemed simple, almost too simple. But when they tested it, the numbers aligned perfectly. The balance was restored. The problem, which had seemed unsolvable, vanished. Relith's eyes widened. She had seen clever humans before, traders, negotiators, but nothing like this. The human did not shout or force his opinion. He simply understood, and in understanding he acted decisively. The council members tried to mask their surprise, but it was clear. The quiet human had done what they could not. After the meeting, the human walked beside Relith through the palace gardens. The air was thick with alien scents, flowers that glowed faintly, vines that pulsed with life, and trees that whispered with every movement of the wind. "You impressed them," Relith said cautiously, not wanting to show too much surprise. The human shrugged, a small, modest gesture. "I just looked at the problem. I did not think it required more than observation and a solution." Relith shook her head. She could not understand this calm, this simplicity. Her people prized boldness, fire, and visible strength. But humans were different. She wondered if she had misjudged him entirely. Days passed, and the whispers about the human grew. Some nobles openly mocked him during ceremonies, calling him meek or useless. Others began to watch quietly, intrigued by the human who seemed to survive without force. The human faced each test calmly. When a courtier accidentally spilled a drink on him, he smiled politely and helped clean it up. When a heated argument erupted over planetary taxation, he listened carefully, offered suggestions that eased tension, and did not raise his voice once. All the while, Relith observed. Each small act made her reconsider her assumptions. Yet she could not bring herself to admit it. Humans were fragile. They did not have the muscle or the instinct for survival that her people cherished. How could someone so gentle ever truly protect her or stand in her place? One evening, she found him in the palace library. The room was vast, filled with holographic projections of alien knowledge, human literature, and technical manuals from countless worlds. He was not studying alien strategy or human history. He was observing. He made notes, sketched diagrams, and tested ideas quietly. "Why do you spend so much time here?" Relith asked. The human looked up, smiling softly. "I learn not just about them, but about the world, about how things work. Understanding allows me to make better choices when action is needed." Relith frowned. She understood words, but not the weight behind them. She had never lived in a world where knowledge could be a weapon. In her society, strength was measured by the loudness of your command, the sharpness of your claws, the fire in your eyes. Humans were silent, thoughtful. Patient, she shook her head and walked away. Yet a small part of her could not stop thinking about him. Perhaps there was more to him than she had realized. Weeks later, a minor crisis occurred on a neighboring planet. A faction threatened to declare independence, claiming mismanagement by the ruling council. The council panicked. Military leaders shouted, advisors argued, and the palace trembled with tension. Relith expected her husband to stay quiet, to let the council handle it. But instead, he asked for access to communication channels, data streams, and strategic reports. The council laughed. "You, a human, what can you do?" One commander sneered. The human's calm did not falter. He simply said, "I will show you." Hours later, the crisis was managed. Through careful negotiation, analysis of resource flows, and strategic offers that no alien had considered, the faction agreed to remain under the council's rule. No threats, no war, just human logic and patience. Relith watched from the balcony as her husband returned. His clothes were slightly dusty, his hands a little scratched from manipulating systems she barely understood. And yet his face carried no pride, only quiet confidence. For the first time, she felt a mixture of awe and uncertainty. She had married a man she thought meek. But now she realized he was not weak at all. He simply showed strength differently. As night fell over the palace, the lights of the city below flickered like stars. Relith stood silently, watching the human move among the alien world he now walked. He was quiet, unassuming, and seemingly ordinary. But beneath that calm exterior, she sensed a depth of power that none of her people could match. She had thought she knew strength. She had thought she knew power. But humans were something entirely different. And she had married one. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. The galaxy would soon see what humans could do. And she, more than anyone, would be there to witness it. The weeks after the human managed the faction crisis passed quietly at first. Life at the palace seemed to return to its usual rhythm. Noble councils, trade negotiations, and ceremonies filled the days, while the human husband continued his quiet observations. He moved through the palace like a shadow, unnoticed by most, yet always aware of everything. Princess Relith watched him closely. Each day, she felt the gnawing doubt that she had misjudged him. Small moments, almost invisible to others, kept appearing. His ability to notice details, to predict outcomes, to remain calm when others panicked. She could not understand it, and yet she could not look away. It started with the trade negotiations. A group of alien merchants approached the council with demands that would have destabilized several sectors. The council's experts argued loudly, each trying to impose their own solution, creating confusion and tension. Relith expected her husband to remain silent, to let the aliens quarrel. Instead, he leaned forward, examining the trade reports and energy data. "Your proposal is mathematically sound," he said softly, "but it creates a bottleneck here. If we adjust the schedule and balance the supply between sectors, both parties benefit without conflict." A murmur ran through the council. Adjusting the schedule seemed simple, almost too simple. But when the numbers were checked, the humans' plan worked perfectly. Both factions were satisfied and tensions eased. Relith stared at him, amazed. It was not a loud or flashy victory. There were no fireworks, no show of power. But it was far more effective than the council's shouting had ever been. Do you think he simply got lucky? One counselor whispered to another. Luck would not work twice, the other replied, watching the human with wary eyes. It happened again in the palace workshops. Alien engineers struggled with an advanced starship prototype. The systems were complex, and the calculations had confounded even the brightest minds in the Empire. Relith expected the human to observe politely, maybe offer a suggestion that would go ignored. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves, examined the systems carefully, and began testing ideas. Within hours, he had identified a flaw in the energy distribution that no alien engineer had seen. The starship stabilized, its systems running smoothly, and the engineers looked at him with disbelief. "How did you do this?" one asked, trying to hide her astonishment. The human smiled quietly. "I noticed a pattern." Sometimes the answer is in the way the pieces fit together, not in forcing them to work. Relith's heart skipped. Each time he acted, he revealed more of his intelligence, his patience, and his unusual skill. She realized her earlier judgment, that humans were fragile, weak, and meek, was wrong. Yet a part of her still clung to old beliefs. Could someone so gentle truly survive in her harsh world? Could he protect her if danger came? That question haunted her constantly. One afternoon, the palace received urgent news. A minor rebellion had begun on a distant mining colony. The rebels had seized control of several stations, cutting off critical supplies. The council called an emergency meeting. The alien leaders argued about military strikes, economic sanctions, and harsh punishments. The discussions grew heated. Relith looked at her husband, expecting him to remain quiet, but he calmly asked for the relevant reports and communication logs. The council laughed openly at him. "A human, you want to lead this?" a general sneered. "You have no experience in war or politics. Step aside." The human did not respond to the mockery. He simply reviewed the data, traced supply chains, and analyzed the rebels' movements. He discovered weaknesses in their network, overlooked routes that could bypass blockades, and identified potential allies who could be persuaded to intervene. By the end of the meeting, he presented a plan. Not one relying on brute force, but on strategy, timing, and human negotiation methods. The council followed his suggestions. Within days, the rebellion was quelled with minimal casualties, and the supply lines were restored. Relith could hardly believe her eyes. Her husband, whom she had assumed meek and helpless, had orchestrated a victory without violence, without aggression, and without raising his voice once. The nobles who had mocked him now looked at him with cautious respect. That evening, Relith confronted him privately in the palace gardens. The glowing plants cast soft light over their conversation. You planned all of this?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The human nodded simply. "I observed, analyzed, and found a way to solve the problem. There was no need for unnecessary conflict." Relith shook her head, a mixture of awe and confusion in her eyes. "I do not understand. You are different. Humans are supposed to be fragile, yet you are not weak at all." He smiled softly. "Strength comes in many forms. Some show it with force, others with patience, observation, and careful action. I suppose humans are the latter." Relith's mind raced. Could this quiet, calm man truly match the strength of her people? Could he survive the dangers that awaited them in the galaxy? She did not know. And yet, a strange sense of pride filled her chest. Perhaps she had married someone extraordinary without realizing it. The signs of his abilities became harder to ignore. During a palace festival, a sudden technical failure threatened the entire event. The main energy conduit feeding the lights and entertainment systems overloaded. Panic spread among the staff. The alien technicians scrambled, unsure how to stabilize the network. The human calmly stepped forward, analyzed the systems, and rerouted energy flows with precision. The lights returned, the entertainment continued, and no harm came to anyone. The nobles who had been ready to criticize him earlier now watched silently, unwilling to question his skill. Relith noticed the change in the court. Whispers about his cleverness were replacing the earlier ridicule. The human did not seek recognition or praise. He acted only to solve problems, to protect life, and to maintain order. Yet the most surprising moment came unexpectedly. During a council meeting, a dangerous alien noble attempted to provoke the human into anger. The noble used threats, insults, and intimidation, expecting to see him flinch, retreat, or submit. The human did not react. He stayed calm, observed the noble's patterns, and responded with logic that exposed the weaknesses in the noble's plan. The noble stumbled, unable to regain control of the conversation. The council watched in stunned silence. Relith finally understood something important. This human did not need to be loud or aggressive to dominate a situation. His mind, his calm, and his understanding of others gave him a kind of strength her people rarely recognized. That night, she could not sleep. She walked to the balcony, looking out over the city lights that glimmered like scattered stars. Her thoughts kept returning to her husband. Every test he faced, every challenge he had met without raising his voice, without displaying force. And yet he had succeeded every time. Perhaps I judged him too quickly, she whispered to herself. Perhaps humans are stronger than I thought. The human, quietly seated in the corner of the room, looked up at her. Strength is not always visible, he said softly. Sometimes it is in knowing when to act and when to wait. Relith nodded, realizing that she was learning a lesson that her people would take years to understand. Humans had survived in harsh conditions for thousands of years. They had evolved not through force alone, but through intelligence, cooperation, and patience. And now she had married one. She watched him carefully, feeling a growing respect and something deeper, a mixture of curiosity and admiration. She wondered what he might be capable of if the galaxy tested him further. The weeks passed, and more challenges arose: trade disputes, minor sabotage, and political threats. Each time the human calmly assessed, acted decisively, and solved problems in ways that confounded even the most experienced alien leaders. Relith began to speak of him differently. She no longer called him meek or fragile. She spoke of his calmness, his skill, and his intelligence. And privately she felt a quiet pride in being his wife. Yet, despite all his successes, he remained humble. He did not boast. He did not seek recognition. He simply acted. And that, Relith realized, was part of his power. Unlike her people, who often relied on intimidation and fear, humans relied on understanding, patience, and subtle influence. The signs were clear. This human, quiet and unassuming, was far more capable than anyone had imagined. And the princess, who had once doubted him, now began to see the truth. She had married someone extraordinary. And this was only the beginning. The calm of the palace was broken one morning by an urgent message from the outer systems. A fleet of unknown ships had appeared near the borders of the Empire. Their technology was strange, far advanced in ways that the alien commanders could not immediately understand. The fleet did not attack outright, but it hovered, observing, testing defenses, and sending coded signals that none of the Empire's translators could decode. Panic spread quickly. The council gathered, voices raised in fear and anger. Strategies were proposed, rejected, and argued over in rapid succession. Military leaders suggested immediate strikes, while diplomats begged for patience. The atmosphere in the palace was tense, crackling like energy in the air before a storm. Relith watched her husband. He stood quietly at the edge of the council chamber, calm as ever, observing the chaos. She could see the muscles of her people tense, their minds racing with fear, and yet he remained still, silent, and focused. "Let me see the reports," he said softly. The council froze. Some of the generals exchanged nervous glances. The idea that a human could provide guidance in a potential war seemed absurd. "You want to handle this?" one commander scoffed. "You cannot even command a squad of guards." The human smiled slightly. "I do not need to command troops immediately. I need data and access to your systems. That is all." The council reluctantly agreed. Panic does not last long in a disciplined empire, but hesitation lingers, and their hesitation gave the human a chance. He accessed the strategic maps, communication logs, and sensor data from the fleet. He began analyzing patterns, movement trajectories, and energy readings that the alien leaders had overlooked. Hours passed, and while the council argued, he worked quietly. Relith watched him from across the room, her heart beating fast. She had seen him solve minor disputes, organize supply chains, and repair starship systems, but this was different. The stakes were higher. Lives were on the line. The safety of entire worlds rested on his decisions. Finally, he spoke. "The fleet is testing our systems. They are not here to attack immediately," he said. "Their energy signatures show a weakness in coordination. They rely heavily on automated routines. If we disrupt their patterns carefully, we can force them to retreat without destroying them or risking our own fleet unnecessarily." The The council murmured, some in disbelief. The human had analyzed the unknown fleet faster than any alien admiral could. "How do we do it?" a general demanded. "Follow my instructions," the human said simply. "I will guide you. We will act together, but only at the right moment. Patience is our advantage." Over the next few hours, the palace became a hub of controlled activity. The human coordinated the Empire's fleets, rerouted energy reserves, and activated hidden defense systems that even the Council had forgotten. He gave precise instructions, calculated timings down to fractions of a second, and predicted how the enemy would respond to each action. When the unknown fleet finally attempted to advance, they found themselves trapped in an invisible web of strategy. Their communications were jammed, their paths blocked by carefully controlled defense drones, and their energy reserves drained by subtle manipulations of the planetary systems. Panic spread among their ranks, and they retreated without a single major battle. The Council stared in stunned silence. The humans had done what the most experienced alien commanders could not even imagine. Entire fleets had been neutralized without shots fired, without destruction, and without chaos. Rilith felt her hands tremble slightly. She had married a man she thought meek, who would bow to the customs and power of her people. Yet he had just outsmarted a potential invader and saved countless lives. She began to understand a truth that her people often missed. Humans did not need to be loud or physically strong to be powerful. Their strength lay in their mind, their patience, and their ability to think several steps ahead. After the crisis, Rilith walked beside her husband in the palace corridors. The lights above cast long shadows, and the faint hum of the energy conduits filled the silence. You saved the Empire," she said softly, still trying to find words for her amazement. He smiled. "I helped prevent damage. The real work was done by everyone following instructions. Humans work best when they cooperate and think ahead. Force is rarely the answer." Rilith shook her head, marveling at him. "I thought I understood strength. I thought I knew what it meant to protect, to survive, to lead. But you are different, and you are far stronger than anyone I have ever known." He said nothing. He did not boast. He did not claim credit. That calm humility was part of what made him extraordinary. Word of his actions spread quickly through the Empire. Nobles who had mocked him now spoke of him with caution. Merchants who had doubted his abilities now sought his advice. The palace staff, who once whispered about his meekness, now shared stories of his incredible skill. But the human remained unchanged. He moved through the palace, quietly observing, helping where needed, and preparing for the next challenge. A week later, another test came. A hostile delegation arrived from a neighboring empire, known for their ruthless tactics and cunning diplomacy. They intended to exploit the recent crisis to claim concessions from Rilith's empire. The council expected confrontation, negotiation, and possibly threats of war. The human took control of the situation. He studied the delegates carefully, noting their mannerisms, their speech patterns, and their history. When he spoke, it was calm, precise, and persuasive. He offered solutions that benefited both empires, while securing the safety and interests of his own. By the end of the negotiation, the delegation left satisfied, having gained little advantage over the empire. Rilith watched him and finally realized that she had been wrong for judging him by appearances. His quiet strength, intelligence, and strategic thinking made him far more capable than any loud or violent display of power. She felt a new sense of respect, admiration, and even pride in being his wife. That night the palace was quiet. Rilith found him reading in the library, surrounded by stacks of reports, charts, and alien schematics. "You are remarkable," she said softly. "I underestimated you." He looked up and smiled faintly. "I never meant to impress anyone. I only do what I believe is right. Humans have survived in difficult worlds for a long time. We learned patience, observation, and planning. Sometimes that is all the strength you need." Rilith sat beside him, still absorbing the truth. Her empire valued boldness, fire, and immediate action. Humans valued patience, logic, and subtlety. And this man, her husband, had shown her that these qualities could be even more powerful than brute force. The next day, the palace buzzed with new respect for the human. Nobles who had once doubted him now sought his counsel. Traders, engineers, and diplomats realized that his calm, strategic mind could solve problems that had long seemed impossible. And Rilith noticed something else. He did not change for recognition. He acted the same, quietly, humbly, and efficiently. As weeks passed, she began to watch him more closely. Every small act, repairing a broken communication system, calming a panicked staff member, resolving disputes, revealed more of his extraordinary abilities. She realized that he was not just clever or lucky. He had a methodical mind, an unshakable calm, and an instinct for problem-solving that made him almost unstoppable. Rilith's feelings shifted. She no longer saw him as Meek. She saw him as someone capable of anything. Someone who could survive, protect, and even inspire in ways that her people had never considered. And she began to wonder, if humans were like this, what could they do when truly tested? Little did she know the galaxy was about to test him. The fleet they had driven away would return, stronger and more determined. Political enemies would conspire against the Empire. And in the coming days, Rilith would witness her husband show a strength that no one, no alien, no council, and no enemy could have imagined. But for now, she simply watched him work, quietly, patiently, calmly. And she felt a mixture of awe and admiration that she had never experienced before. The quiet human had become the center of her world, not by force, not by fire, but by something far stronger. Intelligence, patience, and an unshakable calm that made him truly extraordinary. The calm that followed the human's success with the fleet lasted only a few days. Rumors spread quickly through the Empire. The quiet human, thought meek by many, had outsmarted the enemy and saved entire star systems. Some whispered it with awe, others with fear. His calm demeanor, once a sign of weakness, was now seen as a sign of something far greater, a mind that could outthink anyone. Princess Rilith watched as the council called an emergency meeting. Another fleet had appeared at the edges of the Empire, more organized, more aggressive, and with technology that even the best alien strategists struggled to understand. Panic was rising again, but Rilith felt something different this time. She turned to her husband, expecting him to remain calm, and yet there was more in his eyes than mere observation. There was confidence, a quiet, unshakable certainty. "This is it," she whispered. "This is what I've been waiting to see." The council argued as usual. Military leaders wanted immediate attack. Diplomats begged for negotiation. Others simply wanted to flee to safe sectors. But the human listened, scanning reports, energy signatures, and fleet patterns. Unlike the aliens, he did not panic. He did not shout. He did not show anger or fear. He simply analyzed, thought, and prepared. "Give me control of the defense networks," he said softly. The council stared. "You, a human, again?" one general asked, disbelief clear in his voice. "Yes," the human replied calmly. "I will guide the fleets. I will coordinate defenses. Trust me." Rilith stepped closer. She could see the tension in the council, the doubt, the fear, and yet she knew her husband's abilities were real. "Trust him," she said quietly to the council. "He knows what he is doing." The alien leaders hesitated, but the human's quiet authority left little room for argument. He was given access to the fleet coordination systems, communication arrays, and energy control networks. Once again, he worked silently, calculating movements, predicting enemy strategies, and identifying weaknesses. Hours passed. Outside, the enemy fleet advanced cautiously, scanning for defenses, testing borders, and attempting to probe weak points. The human anticipated every move. Every fleet command he gave, every adjustment in energy flow, every communication he sent was calculated with precision. He did not just react, he predicted, planned, and forced the enemy into a position of weakness. Finally, he acted. The Empire's fleets moved with perfect timing, cutting off the enemy's supply lines and isolating key ships. The enemy's automated systems, designed to rely on predictable patterns, failed spectacularly. Within hours, the fleet was trapped, their energy drained, their movements blocked, and their options exhausted. They had no choice but to retreat. The council watched in stunned silence. Rilith could feel her chest tighten with pride and amazement. She had doubted him once, but now the truth was undeniable. This human, quiet, calm, gentle, had just outmaneuvered an entire fleet that had terrified her people. He had done it without force, without aggression, and without a single unnecessary risk. One counselor whispered, almost to himself, "How can one human accomplish what hundreds of our best strategists could not?" Rilith smiled faintly. She knew the answer, though she had only begun to understand its depth. Humans were not weak. They were patient, observant, adaptable. They understood systems, people, and patterns in ways her people often overlooked. and her husband was living proof. After the battle, the alien nobles tried to thank him, to praise him, or even to challenge him. But the human remained quiet. He did not seek recognition. He simply continued his work, reviewing systems, suggesting improvements, and ensuring that the empire remained safe. Relith followed him to the palace gardens that evening. The air was cool, the soft glow of alien flora reflecting off the palace walls. She finally spoke, her voice filled with a mixture of awe, pride, and a touch of embarrassment. I thought you were Meek, she admitted. I thought humans were fragile, unable to survive here. But you are far stronger than I ever imagined. You outsmarted them, all of them. You saved lives, the empire, everything. He looked at her calmly with a faint smile. I never meant to prove anything. I only do what needs to be done. Strength is not always measured by force or appearance. Sometimes, strength is patience, observation, and the ability to act when the time is right. Relith shook her head. She had never realized how different humans were. Her people prided themselves on dominance, aggression, and visible power. Humans, this human, relied on calm, subtle, and precise actions. And yet, those actions had far greater effect than anything her people had ever attempted. She felt a deep respect for him, stronger than anything she had felt before. But more than that, she felt awe. She had thought she understood strength. She had thought she knew power, but she had been wrong. Humans were not weak, they were extraordinary. The next morning, the council gathered again. This time, they treated the human differently. There was no laughter, no mockery. Some still looked skeptical, but most were curious, cautious, and respectful. He spoke clearly, laying out strategies to prevent future attacks, improve defenses, and strengthen diplomacy. His instructions were precise, practical, and surprisingly simple, yet every suggestion worked perfectly when implemented. Relith noticed a subtle change in the council. They began to consult him first, to ask his opinion on difficult matters, and to test his ideas in controlled ways. It was a quiet revolution. The empire, which had once dismissed him as weak, now began to rely on him in ways no one had imagined. Relith felt her admiration for him grow each day. She realized that his strength was not just intelligence. It was his calmness, his humility, his ability to remain focused under pressure. He did not need to dominate, shout, or fight. He simply understood. And in understanding, he wielded a power her people had rarely seen. That evening, she watched him repair a damaged communication array that had puzzled the Empire's engineers for weeks. He moved carefully, examining each circuit, tracing the flow of energy and making subtle adjustments. Within hours, the array was functioning perfectly. The engineers stared in disbelief. "You did it," one whispered. He shrugged. "It was just a matter of understanding how the system works." Relith smiled quietly. He had done so much, and yet he never sought praise. His humility made him even more extraordinary in her eyes. She had married a human she thought meek, but he was anything but. Days later, a rival noble approached her privately. He spoke with caution, but his words were sharp. "Your husband, he is not what he seems," the noble said. "He has outmaneuvered fleets, solved problems our best minds could not, and influenced the council in ways no human should be able to. How did you find such a creature?" Relith looked at him calmly. "He is human. That is all you need to know. And perhaps that is exactly what makes him dangerous." The noble nodded slowly. Even he understood. Humans were underestimated across the galaxy, and the quiet human sitting beside Relith was living proof of their true power. Later that night, Relith found herself standing beside her husband, gazing at the stars from the palace balcony. She thought about all the moments that had led to this point. The quiet solutions, the careful observations, the patience and calm he displayed in every crisis. "You were always strong," she said softly. I could not see it before." He smiled, a faint, almost shy smile. "Strength is not always obvious. Humans have learned to survive because we observe, plan, and act carefully. We do not need to appear strong to be effective." Relith nodded, finally understanding. Her people measured strength by visible power, by dominance and force. Humans measured strength by patience, logic, and the ability to act when it mattered most. And in that moment, she realized that she had married someone extraordinary. The galaxy had not seen the full extent of human ability yet, but Relith knew in her heart that her husband's calm, intelligence, and unshakable determination would change the way her people, and perhaps the entire galaxy, viewed humans. She reached out and took his hand. "I see you now," she said. Not as meek, not as fragile, but as someone capable of everything. He squeezed her hand gently, and for the first time she felt a sense of partnership unlike anything she had imagined. She no longer stood in front of him to protect him. She would stand beside him, as an equal, as a witness to the extraordinary human she had married. And she knew, without a doubt, that the galaxy would never underestimate humans again. The days after the humans' latest demonstration of skill and strategy passed with a quiet tension in the Empire. Word of his abilities had spread across star systems. Nobles, merchants, and diplomats spoke his name in awe and caution. Some admired him, others feared him. But all agreed on one thing: the quiet human, once dismissed as meek and fragile, had proven himself extraordinary. Princess Relith walked through the palace gardens, watching her husband inspect the energy conduits that powered the palace's outer defenses. His calm movements, careful observations, and precise actions were almost meditative. She could not stop herself from feeling admiration and pride. She had once doubted him, judged him by appearances, and even felt embarrassed by his gentleness. But that was in the past. Now she understood. Humans were different, and different could be stronger than anyone expected. That morning, a message arrived from a distant council of allied systems. A new threat had emerged. An ambitious faction from the Outer Rim had decided to test the Empire's defenses. The council feared that their small fleets could be overrun by a larger, more aggressive force. Panic rose in the palace again, but this time, Relith was not worried. She knew her husband's abilities, and she knew that calm intelligence could do more than brute force ever could. "Do you want me to handle this?" he asked, standing beside her. "Yes," she replied simply. "You will lead." The council was skeptical. Even after everything, some could not believe that a human could manage the situation. The general in charge of the Empire's fleet spoke harshly. Again, you have no experience commanding ships in battle." The human's response was quiet, calm, and firm. "Experience comes from learning, observation, and understanding systems. I have studied your fleets, your technology, and the enemy. I am ready." For hours, he analyzed reports, mapped out fleet movements, and prepared precise strategies. Unlike the alien commanders, who relied on intimidation and fear, he relied on logic, observation, and subtle coordination. He calculated the timing of every maneuver, predicted enemy responses, and created contingencies for every possible scenario. When the enemy fleet finally arrived, they found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Ships attempting to flank were trapped. Supply lines were blocked. Energy reserves were drained by carefully controlled planetary systems. Not a single unnecessary attack occurred, yet the enemy's advance collapsed. Within hours, they were forced to retreat, unable to achieve their objectives. The Empire had survived once again, without mass destruction, without chaos, and without unnecessary loss of life. The council, who had once doubted him, now looked on in astonishment. Traders, engineers, and diplomats from allied systems began requesting his guidance. Stories of the human who had outsmarted entire fleets spread far and wide. Relith watched him, quietly amazed. She had once thought him meek, fragile, incapable of surviving her world. Now she saw the truth. His strength was different, extraordinary, and unmatched in subtle power. Humans did not rely on aggression or dominance. They relied on understanding, patience, and precise action. And in her husband, all these qualities were fully realized. That evening, the palace held a formal ceremony to recognize the actions that had saved entire systems. The emperor himself approached the human, a rare gesture of respect. "You have done what no one else could," the emperor said. "You have shown wisdom, courage, and skill beyond your species. The Empire owes you gratitude." The human bowed politely. "I only did what was necessary. The Empire's safety was the goal. I am grateful to serve." Relith stood beside him, proud and humbled. She realized something important. This human, her husband, had changed the perception of humans in the Empire. They were no longer underestimated, no longer dismissed as fragile or weak. They had shown the galaxy a different kind of strength, quiet, intelligent, and unstoppable. After the ceremony, Relith led him to a balcony overlooking the city lights. The stars above shone like scattered jewels, reflecting on the alien structures below. "You have done more than anyone could have imagined," she said softly. "You have saved lives, the Empire, and even me from underestimating humans. I am proud to be your wife." He looked at her, calm and thoughtful. "You are not underestimating me now, are you?" he asked with a faint smile. No, she replied. I see you for what you are, not meek, not fragile, but strong, capable, and extraordinary, and I want to stand beside you, not in front or behind, together. He nodded, gently taking her hand. Then we stand together. In the following weeks, the empire began to change subtly. Other species, previously dismissive of humans, started seeking human advisors. Traders learned to respect their problem-solving methods. Diplomats noticed their strategic patience. Even rival factions realized that humans, quietly capable and underestimated, were a force the galaxy could not ignore. Relith noticed how the humans' calm, methodical approach affected the palace. Arguments that once escalated into shouting matches now resolved more peacefully. Strategies were planned carefully, with input from diverse minds. And her husband remained at the center, not as a ruler but as a guiding force. His quiet strength inspired others to think, to plan, and to act with intelligence rather than aggression. One afternoon, a crisis arose in the outer colonies. A natural disaster threatened entire settlements. The council panicked. Ships were unavailable, supplies limited, and communication delayed. Relith turned to her husband. Do what you always do, she said simply. He smiled faintly and began coordinating relief efforts. He calculated energy distributions, rerouted transport systems, and ensured supplies reached the settlements efficiently. Using human problem-solving methods, the disaster was managed without panic or chaos. Lives were saved, and the colonies stabilized. Through it all, Relith realized the full scope of his abilities. His strength was not measured by muscle or aggression. It was measured by intelligence, patience, and the courage to act calmly in the face of danger. He had changed her perception of strength, power, and what humans could achieve. That evening, she stood beside him once more on the balcony. The city below glowed like living stars. You have shown the galaxy what humans can do, she said softly. And you have shown me that strength comes in many forms. I am proud to be with you. He took her hand gently. Humans have always survived by being different. We plan, observe, and act wisely. Sometimes that is more powerful than any weapon, and now you stand with me. Together, we are stronger than anything. Relith smiled, feeling a sense of partnership she had never imagined. She no longer needed to protect him. She would stand beside him, equally capable, equally strong in her own way. Together, they were a force the galaxy had never seen before. News of their unity and success spread quickly. Other human allies began to arrive at the Empire, offering support, sharing knowledge, and proving that the strength of humanity was more than anyone had anticipated. The Empire adapted, learning to combine the best of human ingenuity with their own traditions. For the first time, Relith felt a true sense of hope for the future. Her husband had proven himself not only in strategy and intellect, but in his ability to inspire others, build trust, and change minds. He was quiet, unassuming, and humble, but his impact was undeniable. One evening, as the twin moons rose above the palace, she looked at him and said, "The galaxy will never underestimate humans again, and neither will I," he smiled faintly. "Humans have always known what they can do. Now the galaxy is learning too." Together, they watched the moons rise, hand in hand, ready to face whatever challenges the universe might bring. The human had proven his strength, and the alien princess had seen the truth. Strength was not always loud, it was not always visible, but when combined with intelligence, patience, and courage, it was unstoppable. And in that quiet partnership, the galaxy would learn a new truth. Humans, underestimated and often overlooked, were forces to be reckoned with. The Empire had been saved. The princess had learned the true measure of strength. And the human had only begun to show what he and humanity were capable of. Together, they would face the stars, side by side as equals, and no one would ever mistake humans for Meek again.